Yeah, thank you. So we spoke about the Hilbert transform in the last class, and how a Hilbert transform of a given signal will give us the 90-degree phase lag version of the actual signal in the time domain itself. So there is no shifting of domains in the Hilbert transform, and only thing what changes is the 90-degree phase lagged version of the actual signal will be obtained. And to represent this Hilbert transform in time domain, we use the symbol cap. So given the signal x of t, its Hilbert transform x cap of t will be defined as 1 by pi t convolved with x of t. And how we got this, we had seen the derivation here. We saw the complete derivation in the last class, which showed us how we get that time domain equation, which is nothing but convolution of the given signal with 1 by pi t. So here we had considered this Hilbert transformer. Sorry. Yeah, we have considered this Hilbert transformer as a filter with impulse response h of t, and since the Hilbert transformer is supposed to shift all the phase components, all the frequency components of the input signal by minus 90 degrees, we try to represent the Hilbert transformer transfer function. We represented the Hilbert transformer transfer function h of f in the frequency domain. Our assumption was easier. So in the frequency domain, we assumed the transfer function of this Hilbert transformer to be minus j into signum of f, because we have known the definition of signum of f function, which gives us the value +1 for positive frequencies and -1 for negative frequencies. And since we needed this Hilbert transformer to generate a phase lag of 90 degrees, the easy part here was to multiply this signum of f with minus j or minus pi by 2. So j is a value of 90, pi by 2. J indicates a phase shift of 90 degrees or pi by 2. So whenever you needed a phase lag of minus pi by 2, in the frequency domain, it becomes multiplication. So multiply minus j with signum of f, you would get the required job of the Hilbert transformer. So the Hilbert transformer filter should have this kind of transfer function. We showed all that. We showed how that kind of transfer function will look like here. So whenever you multiplied this signum of f with minus j, what would happen to the phase value? All positive frequencies would get a phase lag of minus pi by 2, and negative frequencies would get a phase lead of pi by 2. Or let's say plus pi by 2 would be the change in phase. And the magnitude response would look like this. The value of h of f could be represented like this. All this we saw, and then we tried to represent this h of f from, we got tried to convert it back from frequency domain to time domain. So first we assumed a function for the filter h of f, which should give us 90-degree phase lag. So we assumed that function as minus j signum of f, which was very appropriate. We saw we easily got 90-degree phase lag, right? And after assuming that, all what we did was we tried to convert that h of f back to time domain, or get back h of t. So to convert this back to time domain, we'll get inverse Fourier transform of h of f. And we said this h of f is not a function that satisfies Dirichlet's condition of Fourier transforms. So we can't find Fourier transform directly for this function. So what we have to do, we have to assume exponential functions which would become same as the signum of f. Remember, signum of f is an odd function which doesn't satisfy Dirichlet's conditions. So you had to assume exponential function for the signum function. And after assuming this exponential function, a falling exponential at positive frequencies and a rising exponential at negative frequencies, whenever I took the limits as the scaling value a tends to 0 in these exponentials, this would become same as the signum function. So I could redefine the signum function in terms of exponential functions because the signum function would not satisfy Dirichlet's condition for Fourier transform, and I could not directly find the inverse Fourier transform of h of f. So to find the inverse Fourier transform of h of f, we have to assume h of f in terms of rising and falling exponentials and then take the limits. So that's what we did. Now I have tried to find the inverse Fourier transform of this assumed function alpha of f, which is in terms of exponentials. And we know how to find the inverse Fourier transform. Multiply the given signal with e power j 2 pi ft and integrate between minus infinity to plus infinity. And when we solved for this, we got this expression. Now I'm applying the limits. Remember, the signum function is limit of alpha of f as the scaling value a tends to 0. So we are applying the limits as a tends to 0, and this is the value you're going to get, j by pi t. And finally getting the inverse Fourier transform of h of f. We know h of f was defined as minus j signum of f. Therefore, minus j into j by pi t, it becomes 1 by pi t. This is how we got the expression in time domain for a Hilbert transform to be what? X of t convolved with 1 by pi t, which becomes x of tau into 1 by pi t minus tau d tau. So please remember these two expressions. In the time domain, the Hilbert transformer is defined as x of t convolved with 1 by pi t, and in the frequency domain, it is minus j signum of f, x of f. X cap of f is minus j signum of f, x of f. Okay, remember those two equations. With those things, I think we can move on to, I showed you some standard functions and their Hilbert transforms. This is just an example of some standard functions after finding Hilbert. We can do it for some of the functions a bit later. Next, let's move on to the properties of Hilbert transform. So performing Hilbert transform on a signal is equivalent to phase shifting all the signals by 90 degree. So the only change that the Hilbert transform performs is changing its phase. Amplitude of the frequency components of the signal don't change by performing the Hilbert transform. Whereas performing the Hilbert transform changes cosine into sine or vice versa. So we can say the Hilbert transform gives me the orthogonal of a given signal. In the sense, if I have a signal x of t, its Hilbert transform x cap of t is orthogonal of x of t. Also, since the Hilbert transform introduces a 90-degree phase shift, if I carry out this Hilbert transform twice, so say you have a given signal, for example, okay, I'm not able to. let me just say I have a 1 Hilbert transformer to which we are applying the signal x of t. Output of this Hilbert transformer is x cap of t, the 90-degree phase shifted version. Now I'll take this x cap of t, and when I apply this to a Hilbert transformer again, what do you think you would get? You assume you should get back this. What will happen? Any guesses? See, x cap of t is the 90-degree phase shifted version of x of t. What would the second Hilbert transformer do? Please answer. What do you think the second Hilbert transformer would do?
90-degree phase shift.
It will add another 90 degrees. So here you have 90-degree phase shifted. This will add another 90. So what do you think you will get here? Yes? Yes, you should be getting minus of x of t. 180-degree phase shifted version of the given signal you will be getting. So please remember this. If you take a given signal and pass it through 2 Hilbert transformers, in the end you will be getting the negated version of the actual signal. Okay. Now we'll see some of the important properties of the Hilbert transform. The first property is the evenness and oddness property, which states that the Hilbert transform of an even signal is odd and that of an odd signal is even. So please remember this. Whenever you try to find the Hilbert transform of an even signal, it turns out to be odd, and whenever you find for an odd signal, it will become even. So that is because you are going to get 90-degree phase shift. You can see in the proof here. If the given signal x of t is even, then its Fourier transform x of f will be a real valued function, and it will also be an even function. Therefore, if I try to find x cap of f, how do I find x cap of f? Minus j signum of f into x of f. If x of t is the signal, x of f is its Fourier transform, and if x cap of t is the Hilbert transform of x of t, then x cap of f will be the Fourier transform of x cap of t. Okay. So how do I find x cap of f? Remember the equations I told you, minus j signum of f into x of f. So you can clearly see, since I'm multiplying this with minus j, it becomes an imaginary function. X of f was real, and because of multiplication with minus j, now x cap of f becomes imaginary, and signum of f is an odd function. When you multiply an even function with an odd function, the resulting value will be an odd function. Yes or no? I hope you're following this. Since if x of t is even, then its Fourier transform is a real function and it will also be an even function. But the Fourier of the Hilbert transform, the Fourier of x cap of t, which is given by minus j signum of f into x of f, will become imaginary and odd, because minus j makes it imaginary and signum makes it odd. So if I try to find the inverse Fourier transform now, what is inverse Fourier transform of x cap of f? It is x cap of t. Naturally, if x cap of f is odd, x cap of t will also be odd. So have we proved the requirement? We said Hilbert transform of an even function turns out to be odd, which is what we have shown. If at all the function was even, then its Fourier transform would have been even, but its Hilbert transform, or the Fourier of its Hilbert transform, will be represented as x of f into minus j signum of f. So please remember that. That's how we defined x cap of f. This is x cap of f. Since you've used minus j, it becomes odd. Since you've used signum, it becomes, minus j, it becomes imaginary. Signum, it becomes odd. So naturally, now when you take the inverse Fourier transform of such an odd function, inverse Fourier transform of x cap of f is x of f, x cap of t, which will surely be an odd function. Similarly, you can prove for the given signal being odd. Say if x of t is odd, then its Fourier transform will be odd and imaginary. So if you try to find the Fourier of the Hilbert transform, if I try to find x cap of f, this is nothing, minus j signum of f into x of f is x cap of f. So we are trying to find the Fourier of the Hilbert transform. What happens? Already the given signal was imaginary. When you multiplied with minus j, it became real. Because minus j into j becomes minus j square, which is plus 1. So it became real. And since it was already odd, when you multiply an odd function with another odd function, signum of f is an odd function. So whenever you multiply one odd function with another odd function, we know you will get an even signal. So the actual signal now x cap of f becomes real and even. Therefore, the inverse Fourier transform of x cap of f, which is x cap of t, will also become even. Okay, so please remember this. Every time you have to find Hilbert transform of an even signal, you're supposed to get an odd one. And when you find it for odd signal, you should get even. Next is sign reversal. So applying Hilbert transform operation to a signal twice causes a sign reversal of the signal. We already saw this. That is finding x cap of t and applying it to a second Hilbert transformer will give me 180-degree phase shifted version of the signal, which is minus x of t. So you can just read through this proof. In terms of equations, if you try to prove, we are trying to find the Fourier of double Hilbert transform of the given signal x of t. So in terms of the frequency domain, if I do the same thing, it will be minus j signum of f whole square into x of f. Naturally, this becomes minus j square, which is what? Plus 1, and signum of f into x of f would become, multiplying odd function with any signal, it will become a negated version of that. We have already stated, so you can simply write it as signum of f into x of f or minus x of f. Please remember, it should not have anything at the origin because signum function is 0 at the origin. The next property is energy. Please remember this, very important. So the energy content of a signal is equal to the energy content of its Hilbert transform. So the energy content in both the actual given signal and its Hilbert transform would be the same. And for this, we can use the Parseval's theorem or Rayleigh's theorem, what we call in Fourier transform, to find the energy of a signal. You should be familiar with this Rayleigh's theorem or Parseval's theorem, which tells us the energy value is integral of the square of the given signal, magnitude square of the given signal between minus infinity to plus infinity. And if this value is finite, we call it as an energy signal, right? So the energy in the given signal x of t is given like this. And the energy in x cap of t, the Hilbert transform of the signal, will be what? The square of the Hilbert transform of the signal. And In terms of frequency domain, we know x cap of f is minus j signum of f, x of f. So this becomes square of x cap of f, which is this whole thing square. And we know since it is a magnitude function, minus x of f square will simply be x of f square. So you can see the energy level in both the given signal and its Hilbert transform are the same. Okay. So we are using the fact that minus j signum of f whole square is 1, except at f is equal to 0, where what? There the signal does not have any value at f is equal to 0. It is 0. The next property is orthogonality of the Hilbert transform. Given a signal x of t, naturally its Hilbert transform x cap of t will be orthogonal to the given signal. Orthogonality means where there is 90-degree phase shift between the signal and between the two signals. So that's what we are trying to do in Hilbert transform. So naturally they should be orthogonal. We need not prove this because that's the actual definition. But anyway, using the Parseval's theorem of the Fourier transform, if I try to find the area under the given signal x of t and its Hilbert transform, you are trying to multiply x of t with its conjugate of the Hilbert transform with conjugate of x cap of t, which means in the frequency domain it will be x of f into x cap of f is minus j signum of f into x of f, that is x cap of f, but I want a complex conjugate. So whenever I multiply a signal with its complex with another signal's complex conjugate and find the area under the curve or integrate between minus infinity to plus infinity, you see how this simplifies. This minus j we have taken outside and we have split this integral between minus infinity to 0 and 0 to infinity. Can you guess what is the reason for doing this split up? Why do you think you have split up? We did the same thing when we got the expression for Hilbert transform in the last class. Which function is there in the previous equation? Please observe this carefully. Signum function is there and signum function is defined for what? Positive frequencies, it is +1, for negative it is -1. That's why we are dividing this integral between negative frequencies and positive. We are splitting it into two parts. So we are taking care of the signum. What would be the value of signum function between minus infinity to 0? What is the value of signum function between minus infinity to 0? Its value is -1. And when I have -1, we have already taken minus j here outside. So minus x of f conjugate I have. X of f into minus x of f conjugate. And if you multiply and assume the magnitude, it will just be x square of f. Similarly, for the other half, you will have +1. You have already taken out this. It will become, let me say, minus j into +1 here. It will become again x of f into x of f conjugate, which will again be x of f whole square in terms of magnitude. Okay. So for positive frequencies, you will get this value. For negative frequencies, you get this. So we have also used the condition that x of f is Hermitian, which means that x of x square is even. Anyway, we'll not bother too much about this. This orthogonality property is from definition itself. So actual proof is not needed, but since we are, you'll be asked a question about state the properties of Hilbert transform with proof. If they ask you for proof, you will have to prove this, just 1 or 2 steps. So we know next is, so after the basic properties of Hilbert transform, there is one more important property which you should remember. That is, if I have the product of two signals, let me say, okay, I just have Hilbert given signal multiplied with a high frequency signal. So this is a low frequency signal, X of t or M of t we'll consider usually in communication. This is a high frequency signal. Whenever you have the product of two signals, both of which have their spectra far apart. So say X of t is in the baseband region and C of t is in the high frequency region. This is the frequency spectra of X of t, which is X of f, and this is the frequency spectrum of C of t, which is C of f. This is at carrier frequency, this is at zero frequency, baseband. Remember, this is how we used to consider the signals in communication. So whenever we have two signals which are separated far away in their frequency or frequency spectrum, and if we try to find the Hilbert transform of this product, so whenever we do this, we can easily replace this by taking the actual signal X of t into Hilbert transform of the high frequency signal. So the equivalent for X of t into C of t, the combined Hilbert transform of the product, whenever you multiply low frequency with high frequency, this will result, the end result would be X of t into C cap of t, because you will be finding the Hilbert transform of the high frequency signal only. This is the fourth property of Hilbert transform. I think somehow that slide got mixed. So please remember, the fourth property of Hilbert transform tells us that the Hilbert transform of a product of low frequency and high frequency signal will yield the product of the actual low frequency signal into Hilbert transform of the high frequency signal. Okay, so please make a note of this. And then let's move on to what are ideal filters and practical filters, and then let's see what are band pass signals and low pass signals. So we know an ideal low pass filter is one whose spectrum or whose transfer function is 1 in the specified band of frequencies. Until a given cutoff frequency W, it should pass the signal. So it should pass the signals at all low frequencies, and it should attenuate the signal completely at high frequencies. So where W represents the bandwidth of the low pass filter. Low pass filter ideally passes all frequency components of the given signal at low frequencies until a given cutoff. In this case, the cutoff frequency is W. Beyond that, it will reject or attenuate all the signals. Ideal high pass filter will do just the reverse. It will attenuate all the signals till the given cutoff frequencies, after which it is going to pass all frequencies of the incoming signal. So we have already studied all these filters and we have done it in the lab also. So we should be familiar. So next is an ideal band pass filter. We know a band pass filter is one which passes all the signals in the given range of frequencies. So between a given lower and higher cutoff frequency FL and FH. So all signals which lie within a given band of frequencies will be passed. Rest all will be attenuated. So given an input signal which has larger frequency content, we can filter out only that part of the signal in a particular band of frequencies and reject all the rest. Similarly, a band reject filter would just do the opposite of this, right? How will a band reject filter work? We are not interested in band reject here. Usually we use low pass, high pass and band pass more often in communication. Band reject will just get the reverse characteristics of band pass. It will pass all the signals. So this is the characteristic of an ideal band reject or band elimination filter. A band reject filter will pass all the signals except the signals in a specified band of frequencies. We generally call these frequencies as the lower and higher cutoff frequencies. Here it is mentioned as W1 and W2. So this is the characteristic of a band reject filter. I have shown it only on the positive side of the frequency spectrum. The same thing can be represented on the negative side also. It's mirror image. So we can represent the same thing on the negative side also. But I told you we haven't considered band reject filter because we don't use it much in communication. What is commonly used in communication are the low pass and band pass. The two commonly used filters in communication are the low pass filter and the band pass filter. So what we considered till now were ideal filters, but what happens in a practical filter? What is the difference between that ideal and practical filter which we see here? Can you tell me? See, the ideal low pass filter look like this and the practical low pass filter is looking like this. Ideal band pass filter would be something like this, right? So what difference are you seeing between this ideal and practical? Yeah,
The slope.
slope,
Transition time.
the transition band, what is happening? What is this slope? What do you call this as? Do you remember what you call this transition as in a filter? What is the name given to this transition? Anybody?
Cutoff frequency.
Roll off. We call it as roll off rate for a filter. The roll off is the ratio of change in gain. So the change in gain with change in frequency, delta F, delta A by delta F, or delta A divided by this frequency change is normally measured in decades or octave, 1 decade. We always speak of this change as rate of change of gain per decade of frequency. 1 decade of frequency is a factor of 10. Say from 100 hertz to 1 kilohertz, or 1k to 10k, or 10k to 100k. Whenever there is a change in the frequency by a factor of 10, we say it is 1 decade of frequency. So the change in gain divided by 1 decade, that's how we used to define the transition band or the roll off rate. So this roll off rate, how much is it in an ideal filter? What is the roll off rate in an ideal filter? How much is delta A? Change in gain from maximum gain to minimum, there is some value. But what is the change in frequency here? What is delta F? Yes? This change in frequency is 0. So what is the roll-off rate for an ideal filter?
Infinite.
Infinite. So in an ideal filter, the roll-off rate is infinite, whereas in a practical filter, it can never be infinite because of the practicality of all the equipment which you use. So this can be in the range of 20 decibels per decade, or it can be 40 decibels per decade, so on, 60 decibels per decade, whatever, depending upon the number of RC sections which you use in the filter, and also depending upon the order of the filter which you are going to design, you can have different roll-off rates. So the major difference between a practical and an ideal filter is its transition band or its finite roll-off. Where you have infinite roll-off, why do we call this as transition band? Because it represents the change from pass band to stop band. We call this as pass band. The place where it is passing the signals, we call it as pass band. And the region where it is attenuating the signals, we call it as stop band. So this transition from pass band to stop band will involve what? A straight line, or its value is infinity for an ideal filter. Whereas for a practical filter, it can never be so high. It will be a lesser value, and that is the one of the major differences between an ideal and practical filter. And the characteristics what you see show the same. You can see practical low pass and band pass filters. I told you we commonly use low pass and band pass filter. And the other thing is how to define bandwidth. Bandwidth is defined as the difference between the given cutoff frequency, the difference between the two cutoff frequencies. In a low pass filter, the lower cutoff frequency is 0. Okay, the lower cutoff frequency is 0 in a low pass filter, whereas so this value is 0 in the low pass filter. The higher cutoff frequency is defined at that point where the gain comes to maximum value by root 2. Which point is this? Why do we consider maximum gain by root 2? What happens at this point? You've studied so many amplifiers and all, you should be quick on your answers.
3 dB curve.
Yeah, if I convert this 1 by root 2, it will become minus 3 dB. In decibels, it is minus 3 dB. But what I want is, what do you call this point as? Another name for this point is half power. At this point, the power level of the signal becomes half of it. See, if the power level of the actual signal here was a square or whatever, it will become a square by 2. And you can use any circuit to work till its power level reduces to half its value. And if it goes to less than half, the circuit would not be functioning as per design and we can't use it. Please remember that. All these are fundas which you need to know at the tips of your fingers. From third semester, you're studying the same thing. So, half power point is that point where the power level in a given signal would reduce to half, and till that point I can make use of the circuit or the system as it is. So till the power level goes from maximum to half, you can still keep using the system, but once it reduces to a value below half, there is no usage for that signal system or whatever circuit. You can't use it. That's why we call this difference as the bandwidth. the frequency at this half power point minus the frequency at the starting point. So the lower cutoff and higher cutoff, we call this as the cutoff frequencies. For a low pass filter, lower cutoff is 0 and the higher cutoff is the point where we come down by 3 decibels from the maximum gain, or in terms of actual values, maximum gain by root 2. But remember, at this point, the power level of the signal becomes half. Okay, so that's how you define bandwidth. Next, let's see what are low pass and band pass signals. So very important in communication. In all communications, we talk about low pass and band pass signals commonly. A signal in which the spectrum, when I say spectrum, it is frequency content of the signal, is located surrounding the zero frequency. So whenever you have a signal whose frequency content is located in the vicinity of 0, very close to 0. So I'm writing only the positive portion. If you want, you can write the negative portion also. So such signals are called low pass signals. So they are basically the message signals which are inherently having low frequency. They can be audio. Even this signal, usually remember the audio signal lies somewhere from 300 Hertz to 3.4K. You remember this voice signal. Human voice ranges between 300 Hertz to 3.4K. Last time we did so much about this. Even this is a low pass signal because it is close to 0. So usually we call all those signals which are very close to 0 and very often including the 0 frequency as low pass signal. Whereas a signal which lies far away from 0 in the vicinity of a high frequency known as the carrier frequency is known as a band pass signal. So a signal with a spectrum far away from the 0 frequency. See, this signal has a spectrum which is quite far off from 0 frequency. Okay. And the frequency spectrum of the band pass signal is usually located around the carrier frequency Fc. And please remember, Fc is usually much higher than the bandwidth of the given signal. So here, the bandwidth of the low pass signal, if I consider it here, or you take the total signal only, say its bandwidth is W, I can say Fc is much greater than W. So please remember this difference. Whenever a signal is located at a high frequency which is far away from 0, and usually it will be surrounding the carrier frequency Fc, and that carrier frequency Fc will be much greater than the bandwidth of the signal, then we call this signal as band pass. And if a signal is located close to 0 or inclusive of 0, then we call such a signal as low pass signal. So these are the basic definitions. Next, we'll see the mathematical representation of low pass and band pass signals. So we'll move on to let me say mathematical. It's very important. How do you represent low pass and high pass signals, or let's say low pass and band pass signals mathematically? For that, we need some more mathematical concepts. And band pass signals and their interconversions, converting from low pass to band pass and band pass to low pass. So we'll be studying all this. For this, we need one fundamental mathematical concept. The first concept which you need for this is called the pre-envelope of a signal. So let me just define what is this pre-envelope, and after that I'll stop. Pre-envelope of a signal. Say I have a signal, let me say the given signal is g of t. So let given signal be g of t. Then the pre-envelope, I'll call it as PE, pre-envelope is defined as g plus of t. We have two types of pre-envelope. Let me call this as the positive pre-envelope. It is defined as g plus of t, which is given as g of t plus j into g cap of t. So remember this basic definition. The pre-envelope of a signal, which is known as g plus of t, is represented like this. It is defined as the given signal plus j times its Hilbert transform. So we'll call this equation 1. On similar basis, I can define g minus of t. This is defined for negative frequencies. This is for positive. You'll see can be defined as g of t minus g times or j times g cap of t. So just remember these basic equations. We'll continue with the complete representation in the time and frequency domain and interconversions in the next class. Okay. So this is known as, we'll use the concept of pre-envelope and complex envelope. Pre-envelope and complex envelope is used to define low pass and band pass